Hello and welcome back to Sage and Stone Homestead. My name is Heather and I'm very excited to get the spring garden in the ground today. So in front of me I have varying brassica plants that are frost tolerant. We're not really close to our last frost date yet. It's the end of February and our estimated last frost date isn't until about April 19th, April 20th. So even though it feels like a really nice spring day out today, I know that there are some more freezes ahead of us, so it's not time to be planting anything frost tender quite yet. But we have plenty of frost tolerant things going in the garden today. I've got some purple cauliflower, some kales, cabbages, and some broccoli, as well as some onions and some peas. So let's get to planting. This year I'm actually planting my brassicas a little bit closer together than I have in years past. We have a hard time getting some of the broccoli plants to really come to a head. Our summers, when they come on, they just come on real fast and hard, and high heat is really, you know, it's a problem for brassicas. If they haven't already formed their head, usually they'll just go to seed if it gets too hot. Really, a few days above 85 degrees Fahrenheit is going to really trigger them to go to seed instead of give you the big beautiful head. So some local gardeners and some subscribers suggested to me a couple tips to get my brassicas really tolerating the heat well, and so I'm going to be planting the plants a little bit closer together. So I'm thinking normally I would do about 9 plants per 4-foot by 4-foot bed, and I think I'll do at least 12, possibly 16. I may do one every square foot just to see what happens. I did a little bit more research last night. I was on the MI Gardener channel. Luke, he grows a beautiful garden in Michigan, and 5 years ago he had a video where he showed how closely he plants his brassicas, and they are quite close. I don't think they're as close as 12 inches apart, which is what I would have to do in order to fit 16. So I think I'm going to aim for 12 per bed. There's still quite a bit of mulch here from when I had my fall lettuces in this bed. I still may have to top off a little bit of mulch, but the soil underneath is quite rich. Plus I did just top dress with a little bit of fertilizer that I had laying around. Here's our first purple broccoli here. It's not quite growing roots out of the bottom of the pot yet, but there's a lot of roots there with some rabbit manure that we stuck in the cups. All right, first one in.
When I wait, I know you are with me. In the dark, I can almost see you clearly. Every day, you're singing over me. Like water, my love runs free.
I did end up just going ahead and putting in the 16 broccoli plants over here. So I guess we'll see how that works out. In theory, planting them closer together helps them shade one another and protect them from the summer heat. So we'll see how it works out. I hope it does. It won't necessarily be a loss if it doesn't work out, because it's really hard for me to grow broccoli here. Last year I had a really great crop, and so we can hope for the best, but I guess expect the worst. Is that how it goes? Over here in this bed is where I'm gonna plant my cabbage. And I do have trellises here, and I have a plan for the future to plant tomatoes along the back side of the trellis. I can't plant tomatoes until around the end of April, early May, or else I risk them being exposed to a frost. So I need to keep that in mind, that as these cabbages grow, they're gonna be taking up a lot more space with their leaves, and I don't really want them shading out the places that I'm going to be putting my small tomato seedlings. So I have 12 cabbage plants to put in. I'm going to be utilizing these 2 beds, and I'm only going to be planting them on the front half of the beds here. So it's going to be 6 per bed for the cabbage. Even though the cabbages are going to be occupying the same space or the same bed as the tomatoes for a short time, it won't be for forever. And then when these come out, I plan on putting green beans right here. All the little sticks and things that you see in this bed are actually the green bean tendrils and vines from last season. Beans are what's known as nitrogen fixers. So what they do is they take nitrogen out of the air with their leaves, and they can put it down into their roots and leave more nitrogen in the soil than what they took. And one way to really maximize that benefit of beans is to take the plants down when they're all spent and done, and to just add the whole plant back into the soil. You're maximizing the amount of nitrogen that the plants are able to put in the soil, as well as adding organic matter. Hi, Calamity. It's the Calamity Show, of course. Yes, I'm planting. Can you tell? I'll come feed you in a minute. And lastly, as far as started plants go, I have two different varieties of kale. There's scarlet kale and lacinato or dinosaur kale. And usually these plants need about 1 foot spacing, or one plant per square foot in a bed. And that's if you're going to be growing them out full size. And these plants can get pretty big, their leaves can get pretty big, but we like to actually pick the greens as baby greens. And when you do that, the plants genuinely don't need that much space. So I'm going to be using half of this bed for the kale. The other half is our bee balm, which is starting to come back. The bee balm is going to get really tall, but that won't happen for several months yet. And by that time, it's going to be pretty hot for the kale to thrive anyway. So this is going to work out really well. Whenever possible, it's a really good idea to mulch your plants. We deal with a lot of wind pressure here, and you'd think that the wind would only affect like the stability or the strength of the plants, when in actuality the wind serves to really wick away moisture from the ground. And having a really thick layer of mulch over the plants or around the plants really helps slow that down. Mulch also helps keep down the weed pressure. It keeps the soil temperature more consistent, and as the mulch breaks down, it helps feed the microbiome in the soil and adds a richness and some nutrition to the soil, depending on the type of mulch that you use. If you use something like a straw mulch, it's a lot less likely to add nutrients, though it does help with the weeds, helps with the moisture, and it helps add organic matter to the soil. So it's not a bad thing. Straw is just too light here. I can't use pine straw, I can't use regular straw, and I can't really use hay just because the wind is so quick here that it's just gonna blow my mulch away, and it does happen. One of my friends uses shredded up paper, like newspaper, in her garden, and that works really well. It wouldn't work well here. What we use is just a hardwood mulch from the building supply store, and it works very well. I used this mulch for the first time last year, and basically all of it broke down by the time this garden was planted, which is good because if your mulch, let's say you used a cedar mulch, for example, cedar mulch takes a long time to break down, and while mulch is breaking down, it is using nutrients in the soil in order to break down. And if it takes a really long time to break down, if you have a lot of really large woody pieces in your soil, that can really serve to sap the nutrients away from your plants, which is not the goal. But this, I think it's the Evergreen brand, this mulch has worked really well for us, and it hasn't caused any kinds of problems like that. So now that all the started plants are in, it is time to plant the onion sets. And I wasn't going to put in onions this year because I can get onions pretty readily at our local Amish store, but I pretty much never see red onions there. So when I saw these at the farm store for really, really cheap, I decided I'd pick them up. Some of these have already started to sprout, so it's pretty easy to see which end is up when they're doing this. Otherwise, you want to look for those little hairy roots on the bottom, on the bottom of the bulb. This one has a little more of them. This is the bottom side, so we're going to put bottom sides down, and you don't necessarily have to bury these. The little tops can be sticking out a little bit, and I'm going to be spacing them just about every 4 inches.
Oh, there is nothing like your love. There is nothing and no one above. Oh, come be with us, Holy One.
Now it's pea time. So peas are frost tolerant down to about 19 degrees in my experience. Because we're so late in the season as far as the winter season goes, I don't think we're going to be seeing 19 again, knock on wood. So I'm gonna be planting the whole side of this arch trellis in peas. I plan to use this trellis for something different in the summer, and that's what's great about planting these crops as early as you possibly can, is we can plant these peas along the inside of this trellis here. They're gonna grow up really big, and on the other side of the trellis, when it comes time to plant my squash, I can do so back there, and by the time the squash is big enough to really be taking over this trellis, the peas are just gonna be spent and be ready to come out anyway, and so it's gonna work out very, very well. And peas are also nitrogen fixing, so they're going to be giving us food as well as feeding the bed. There's 175 seeds in here. We'll see how many we can get in this row. It says we can sow them 1 inch deep, 2 inches apart, and here's the kicker. It says in rows 2.5 feet apart. Because I'm planting in a raised bed, I don't have to worry about row spacing at all. If I wanted to plant peas every 2 inches and harvest them as pea shoots, you absolutely could. If you're planning on growing them as full plants, I wouldn't plant them that densely because they're gonna get tangled all over each other. The little tendrils are gonna try to climb the plants and it's going to be a little bit of a mess. So I am going to do just 1 row here, 2 inches apart. And I've got my handy dandy chopstick, which is going to create my planting holes for me. Sign of a good morning's work. So most of what I'm going to plant for the frost-tolerant spring garden is officially in. I did go ahead and decide to plant this side of the trellis as well. 175 seeds actually went a lot further than I thought they would, spacing them every 2 inches. And so this whole thing is going to be full of peas and not very long. Back here in these beds on the north side of the garden, this is largely perennial. So I do have strawberries, which I'm going to be putting in a few more strawberries. We have some rhubarb, which has started to come up. And I also have quite a few asparagus crowns. So most of the garden is as planted as it's going to be until the spring and summer garden comes. And I have a feeling that's going to be sneaking up on me before I know it. I'll be starting those seeds the first week of March. Usually I like to start them by about Valentine's Day. I decided to hold off this year because of how weird the winter has been. I am not convinced that winter is totally over, and I am worried about a late freeze. So I don't want my seedlings to be suffering later in the season in those smaller pots. So I'm just gonna wait. As far as watering today, I'm only gonna water the onions and the peas. The rest of the stuff, these plant starts, were pretty saturated when I put them in. We're gonna get some rain on Wednesday. Today is Monday, and so these guys, they're gonna be just fine.